South Africa has come out tops with Cape Town and Johannesburg ranked among Africa's top 3 most attractive cities, showcasing the country's thriving urban environments and commitment to quality of life. And joining me now to unpack the report further is the Africa Report's business editor, Kanika Sagan. Thank you so much for your time, Kanika. Now, when we actually talk about attractive, what criteria are we using to determine this?
So we looked at a number of different criteria. And I think one of the most important things to say is that a lot of the kind of data that we've collated and put together for this is actually down to opinion polls. So when the idea for putting this ranking together came about this time last year, you know, our team was looking at how we would be able to rank the most attractive cities. You know, this is something that hadn't been done before. You know, so it was quite a big undertaking, really.
All right.
And so one of the things that we looked at specifically was FDI flows. That was one of the biggest things that, that indicated economic attractiveness to the cities. And then the rest of the criteria was actually done through opinion polls. So we went to our, you know, readers, you know, they're top business people, they are policy makers, you know, they are the people that are traveling around the continent, visiting the cities, you know, to invest. And some specific questions around quality of life, infrastructure and housing, access to services, and then we overlaid that with FDI, which was the only quantitative value that we had in the survey.
Now, do the most attractive cities have to satisfy all the categories to the highest levels, or are there some categories that have more weight? I mean, you mentioned, for example, FDI flows. Does it have to be across the board?
So the way we looked at FDI, we wanted it to be kind of representative of now. So we actually looked at FDI data from 2019 to 2023 inclusive, but we weighted it more heavily to the data that we could get for 2023. So it was much more current. But then when you look at the rankings, for instance, as you mentioned at the beginning, Cape Town and Johannesburg are the you know, in the top 3 rankings, and Johannesburg, obviously, you can see when you look at the more granular detail, you know, really high FDI flows into Johannesburg. And I think it, you know, accounts for like 16% of the country's GDP. So obviously, you know, a huge economic hub, good infrastructure. But the one thing that came out from our respondents was the security issue, which really brought down the score when you look at the quality of life indicator. So while, if you were to isolate the quality of life data, Johannesburg would be much lower than it is in the overall ranking. And that's because we've looked at all of these different points.
Well, you actually talk about the fact that below 9th place, you do see critical shortcomings. What exactly are those in a nutshell?
So I think it's definitely to do with a lack of infrastructure. So, you know, if there's difficulty getting around a city, it's going to be difficult to do business around a city. I think that's kind of, you know, a given. I think access to services are much lower in those cities. So, you know, safe housing, schooling, you know, even things like restaurants, you know, you want to have a good quality of life. And so those were kind of major factors there as well. One of the really interesting things that did come out of the survey, though, was how important cleanliness was to our respondents. So that had the greatest standard deviation, right? So, and you can see Kigali is pretty high up in the rankings, and it was voted one of the cleanest cities, you know, and I think anybody who's been to Kigali, you know, sees that, see how clean it is. And I think that was one thing that didn't shock us, but was quite, you know, interesting to see that people really value how clean a city is. And I think that's got a lot to do with how inviting the city is as well.
Well, I mean, you talk about cleanliness and really the world is transitioning to cleaner, greener energy. How much of a factor was that in your criteria? And are you looking at it as it carrying more weight as we move closer to 2030?
So we didn't look specifically at kind of the use of green technology in how that enhances the city, but I think that was picked up in sections of the quantitative survey that we did when we do ask about, you know, infrastructure, accessibility, and the quality of the services, cleanliness. So it becomes kind of, you need to kind of infer what a lot of them are saying by looking at those different points. I think you know, how our ranking will evolve. You know, don't forget this is the first of its kind. It's unique. You know, there's no comparable data, and this was the beginning. So I think as the survey evolves, as we, you know, widen the net, we have more people responding, we are able to actually put in more qualitative data as well. We'd be able to maybe pull out those threads a bit more about how important, you know, this green transition, a green economy, clean infrastructure is. When it comes to living and investing in a city.
And Kanika, I understand that there was a limit of choosing a maximum of 2 cities per country. If that weren't a limitation, would there have been any serious contenders anyway?
I don't think so, to be honest. I mean, the way that we did it, we limited it to 2 cities per country because we wanted to create a ranking of comparison, right? We wanted other cities from, you know, other capital cities, other great big investor destinations, to be able to compare themselves to other countries and see where they were. And I think, you know, there are definitely some cities that are missing in the ranking. I think Durban is not in there, for instance. Obviously, a major player, big investment destination.
I was wondering about that one.
Marrakesh is not in there. These are big cities and kind of important to look at. And I think, again, further down the line, maybe when it's a much more established ranking, we might be able to pull those in. But what we thought was important was to kind of create something where other cities, other countries could look at specific examples in neighbouring countries and be able to compare themselves. You know, the cities are the powerhouses, they're the driving force of economic development for the country. And so I think to have, I guess, a proportion of cities throughout the continent, as opposed to them being weighted to certain countries, is really important.
All right. Well, thank you so much for those very, very interesting insights. Kanika, really appreciate it. That was Kanika Sagan from the Africa Report.